a general idea. Take your Bible and turn to Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14. Lord willing, and we're not going to do it yet, but we've been doing these services live. We're going to continue to record them live, but probably sometime in June, I'll possibly not put them on Facebook until after the service. I will record the message, then go back and upload them to Facebook. You might not get it till about 1 o'clock. The 11 o'clock service, you might not get to 1. The 6 o'clock service, you might not get to 7 or 8. Because sometimes and what it does, it gives me an opportunity to go back and edit out any of the announcements or any of the other things, like somebody may mention somebody's name in a prayer list, and I don't want everybody to know, like I mentioned somebody's name the other day in the prayer list, and I saw the man, and I told him, and he said, no, that was fine. I said, I didn't know if anybody knew what you had, and I said, I apologize. He said, no, that was fine. So that'll give us that opportunity. So bear in mind, right now, it's still live. And when it's live, if you say anything in church, this phone picks it up very well. We're praying about possibility getting one called a Move, M-O-V-E, which is about $400, which it takes better pictures than this, and it's a whole lot better, but I don't know that we're going to do it yet. But in Luke chapter 14, we've been looking at excuses. We finished Psalm 23, and I want us to begin reading in verse number 12, and if you can, out of respect and are able, let's stand as we begin reading in verse number 12. Then said he, this is Jesus, also to him that bade him, when thou makest a dinner or a supper, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, neither thy kinsmen, nor thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, and a recompense be made thee. But when thou makest a feast, call the poor, the blind, the maimed. Thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. And when one of them that sat at meat with him heard these things, Jesus is sitting at meat, he's sitting at a meal, he says this, blessed is he that shall eat bread in the kingdom of God. Then said he, Jesus begins to teach them a parable. A certain man made a great supper and bade many. And by the way, Jesus is sitting at a meal when he's telling us this story. And he sent his servant at supper time to say unto them that were bidden, come, for all things are now ready. And they all, with one consent, began to make excuse. I laughed this morning, and I was laughing again a while ago as I read this. Now listen to the excuses. The first said unto him, I have brought a piece of ground, and I must needs go and see it. I pray thee, have me excused. Another said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen, I go to prove them. I pray, have me excused. Another said, I've married a wife. And he didn't say, I pray thee, have me excused. He didn't ask for permission. He said, I've married a wife, therefore, I can't come. He didn't say, have me excused. He just said, I've married a wife, I cannot come. So that servant came and showed his lord these things. Then said the master of the house, being angry, said unto his servant, go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in thither the poor, the maimed, the halt, and blind. The servant said, Lord, it is done as thou hast commanded, and yet there is room. He said unto them, go out into the highways and hedges, and compel them to come in, that my house may be full, that none of those men which were bidden shall taste of my supper. You may be seated. I'm entitled the message this morning, and you'll see it in the 3 excuses. I was telling somebody the title, and somebody said that used to be a song. I've never heard the song. I didn't know it, but it does fit. Someplace, something, and someone. Now, if anybody ever heard a song entitled that, I've never heard it. But somebody said there was a song. Someplace, something, and someone. Excuses are something that we're all familiar with and something that we all use. Excuses are something you hear every day. Matter of fact, If you need an excuse, there's a web page dedicated to giving you excuses for every occasion you can think of. The main page reads, you'll find here every excuse you'll ever need, from downright lies to plausible reasons why you did or didn't do whatever it was you were supposed to or not. A page dedicated to that. The website provides excuses for being caught lying, being late, being overdrawn your checking account, for calling off your wedding, forgetting, and a score of other things. They cover all kinds of excuses. Excuses are something that are offered by the young and by the old, by the married and the unmarried. According to the UPI news item, the Metropolitan Insurance Company published some unusual excuses for automobile accidents from some of their policyholders. I want you to just consider some of them. Here was one excuse for the wreck. An invisible car came out of nowhere, struck my car, and vanished. Quite an excuse. I've been driving my car for 40 years when I fell asleep at the wheel and had an accident. As I reached the intersection, a hedge sprang up, obscuring my vision. I pulled away from the side of the road, glanced at my mother-in-law, and headed over the embankment. That might be a pretty good excuse. Boy, your mother would give me a hard time for that one. A pedestrian had no idea which direction to go, so I ran over him. The telephone pole was approaching fast. I attempted to swerve out of its path when it struck my front end. And I tell you, we all have excuses. And in our text, in the previous verses in Luke, Jesus has been invited to a supper with the Pharisees. And he uses this occasion to teach about the gospel message and its invitation. Jesus, to start with, compares salvation in these verses to a great feast. He's talking about salvation and what a feast it is. Now, to look at some believers, you would think the Christian life is a fast, or a funeral, or a famine. But Jesus likens it to a great feast. And excuses are being offered as to why the invitation was refused. And in our text, you'll see that plans have been made for the supper. The provisions have been prepared. The invitations have been sent out. Notice, if you will, in verse number 16, the elaborate preparation. A certain man made a great supper and bade many. This is not just any supper. This was a great supper. This was a magnificent supper. This was a supper with all you can eat. And then we see the earnest proclamation in verse number 17. He sent his servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, come, for all things are now ready. It's all ready. You ain't got to wait. Once you get there, we're going to eat. So there was an elaborate preparation, an earnest proclamation. But in verses 18 to 21, the excuses begin to come. I want to examine those excuses that people use sometimes as to why they won't get saved, or why they won't serve God, or why they can't do this or do that. Somebody said an excuse is a sham reason that one gives in an effort to cover up the real reason. I really believe that. George Washington said, it's better to offer no excuse than to offer a bad one. Charles Haddon Spurgeon said this, excuses are curses, and when you have no excuses left, there will be hope for you. I want you to think about these excuses. I want you to think about these three people that the Lord sends it out, and he's teaching a parable, and he sends out and he says, in verse number 18, they all began to make excuse. By the way, an excuse is something you have to make. A reason is not something you have to make. But an excuse, you have to make an excuse. The first said, I can't come because I bought a piece of land and I must go need and see it. I pray, have me an excuse. You say, what was the first one's excuse? Can I tell you, the first one said, I cannot have salvation because of my land. I bought a piece of land, I bought a piece of ground, and I must go need see it. I pray thee, have me excuse. Now, here was a man, I want you to see the foolishness of this excuse. Here was a man who had just dropped probably his entire savings into a wonderful piece of real estate. He's just acquired possibly a rare piece of property. He was so consumed with what he could get, he's consumed about it, and he says, I pray thee, have me excused. He had an excuse of accumulation. I've accumulated something. And he says, this land, that my accumulation has caused me to miss out on the great supper of salvation. There was the land that had to be pursued. I want you to think tonight with me, or think this morning with me. I think you'd agree with me that it'd be foolish to buy a piece of property that you've never looked at. Nobody in this church would buy a piece of property that you've never looked at. You first look at the property to see if you want to buy it, not buy it and then go look at it. That'd be like buying a house and coming home and saying to your wife, honey, you know, we've been talking about buying a house. Well, guess what? I bought one on the way home this afternoon. And the wife all of a sudden jumps up for joy, throws her arms around the husband's neck, plants a big kiss on him and says, oh, thank you, sweetheart. Where is it? Does it have a big kitchen? How big are the bedrooms? How many bathrooms? He said, I don't know. I bought it, but now we need to go see it. There was a man who said, I bought a piece of property, and I've got to go see it. Can I tell you, this man was one of two things. He's either a liar or he's a fool. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. He's probably both. Anybody that would do this is both. This excuse is so shallow that it's downright stupid. Can I get an amen right there? I mean, how many people say, they say certain things today, guns kill people. I've had guns in my closet. I've got a gun beside my bed. I got a gun in my car. And can I tell you, I've never had any of those guns jump up and shoot somebody. That's a stupid excuse. If that holds water, then my spoon and fork made me fat. Let's outlaw spoons and forks. And if that excuse holds water, then let's outlaw all erasers on pencils, because the erasers on my pencils made me spell words incorrectly and made me put the wrong answer down. Here's a man who says, listen, there's a great supper prepared, but I've got a piece of ground, and I've got to go see it. Now, let me ask you this. Would the ground, the piece of property, be there the next day? Would the supper be there the next day? The supper would not be there, but the piece of property would. Can I tell you, there's no way this piece of land could develop legs during the afternoon and run away. I put this in my Bible. A man's love for real estate is often an indication of his real state before God. A man's love of real estate is often an indication of his real state before God. Can I tell you, the inspection could have been carried out later. After all, had he not already purchased it? He could have been expected it 2 or 3 days later, Brother Doc. He said, I bought a piece of land. Also, since most banquets, can you tell me when most banquets occurred in the Bible? In the evening. You couldn't look at a piece of house like that without getting the power turned in and all that. And you could do that during the daytime. And by the way, they didn't have electricity back then. He could have went to the banquet and looked at the property during the day. I wonder how many people today are using the same excuse. Possibly they're aware that Christ has made every provision for your salvation. He's paid the price. All you got to do is come. But their desire is, I bought a piece of property, I can't come. I've got a piece of land. Can I tell you, where there's a will, there's a way. If you have a will, and you have to decide whether you're going to trust Christ or not. And now it's obvious to note that the alleged necessity in this excuse was no necessity at all. Who made the must? Who come up with the must? I must. He says, I must not needs go and see it. God didn't come up with it. The man did. The field was not going to run away till tomorrow. I mean, at least. The bargain was finished. He'd already bought it. There was no necessity for going. The next day would have been quite as well as today. So the must was entirely in his mind. Man said, I can't come because I've got some land. I want you to look at the second excuse. Another said, I have bought. That means he's already bought it. I've bought the yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. I pray thee have me excused. One man said, I can't do it because I got land. The other man said, I can't do it because of my labor. I can't do it because I've got work to do. This man's excuse to put off coming was he's just too busy. He said, I've got to go work my yoke of oxen. He couldn't find time to come to the banquet of salvation. I can hear him say, you know, the supper really sounds great, and I really would love to come, but I just can't. I've got all this work to do, and I just can't get away right now. Maybe later, but right now, I'm just too busy. I don't know if you've ever heard that excuse or not, but it seems to be one of popular when it comes to spiritual things. People are just too busy, and to think we find time for anything we want to do. But when it comes time for God, I'm too busy. That is, of course, until their back's against the wall, or till they're flat on the table or bent over double, then they've got time for God. And this, again, this invitation was for supper time in the evening, which takes place in the evening. I wonder how much of the field, Brother Thomas, could he plow at night? How many understand? It was a foolish excuse. It was stupid. You and I know dozens of people who don't have time for God because they stay too busy with their job. They are so consumed with their work. They say, I can't squeeze God into a little schedule. I've known people who used to serve God, and they became so successful that they no longer have time to serve God. You see, one man said, I've got land that's got to be proved or procured. The other man said, I got livestock that's got to be proved. I don't know how many of y'all have heard the name R.G. Lee. He tells a story. One time he was a pastor up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee. Adrian Rogers followed him. But R.G. Lee was a great orator. He had a man in his church that was called Bob. Bob and his family served God faithfully when he was pastor. Bob was a business retail genius. And he started a single store that was so successful he expanded and built other stores until he was wealthy. However, he was so busy when he built all those other stores, he didn't have time for God anymore. Dr. Lee went to see. And he said to Bob and his family, he said, they showed up now about once every 2 months. And he said he quit working for the church because God had blessed him so much. Well, R.G. Lee was pretty bold. R.G. Lee went to see the man one day, walked into Bob's office, walked around, and he walked right past the receptionist, past Bob's secretary into the office. Bob was surprised, but he said, Dr. Lee, I'm so glad to see you. And Dr. Lee said, Bob, I've come to pray about your business. And Bob stammered, why? Sure, that's fine to pray. They got down on their knees. R.G. Lee began to pray. Lord, I pray that Bob's business will fail. Bob's ears perked up. R.G. Lee continued. I pray that you'll take away all those other stores and give him back the original store, because with the original store, he could come to church. And you remember, Lord, when he just had one store, how he could come to church. But now he's got so many, he said he's so busy he can't serve you. So, Lord, put him back to where he was. Amen. Bob said, Dr. Lee, I really didn't like that prayer. Dr. R.G. Lee said, that's okay, Bob. I wasn't talking to you anyway, but I'll see you Sunday. That prayer got Bob's attention. And on Sunday, you know where he was? He's back in church. Are you using your excuse as to why you can't serve God? Here was one who said, I've got an excuse of accumulation. I've got some land. Here's one who says, I've got an excuse of of labor. I can't serve God. He put it off. It was the excuse of procrastination. But I want you to see the third. Third person says, I can't because of the land. I can't come to the great server. I can't get saved. I can't get saved because my labor won't allow it. I can't serve God. The third one says, I can't because I got a lady. He said, I've married a wife. Therefore, I can't come. Notice verse 20. I've married a wife. There and therefore, don't have me excused. I'm not begging off. I'm just telling you, I cannot come. Now, I think I could have understood it, Rock, if he'd have said this. I've married a wife, and I'll be 15 minutes late. Or 20 minutes late. How many of you could have understood it? I could have understood that. But this fellow said, I've got married, and my wife won't let me come. That's what he said. My wife's my boss. I can't come. Don't have me excuse. She ain't going to let me. It reminds me of the henpecked husband that was advised by the psychiatrist to assert himself. He said, psychiatrist said, you don't need to let her bully you. You go home and you tell her and show her who's the boss of this house. Husband decided to take the doctor's advice. He went home, slammed the door, shook his fist in his wife's face, and growled. From now on, lady, you're taking orders from me. I want my supper right now, and when you get it on the table, you go upstairs and lay out my clothes. Tonight I'm going out with the boys. You're going to stay at home where you belong. And another thing, do you know who's tying my tie? She said, I certainly do. The undertaker. Here's the guy said, I cannot come. Now, I've studied that excuse. By the way, the Lord knows all our excuses. I cannot come. Now, for years, I've always said this. If any man had the perfect excuse, it was this man. And I don't think so. Because he didn't say have any excuse. He said, he didn't say I pray thee. He said, I cannot come. And I'll tell you, to be honest with you, every married man sympathizes with this man. Like I said, it sounds like to me he either just got married and he's already henpecked. Or perhaps he rules the roost, but just sits on the end of the bed and crows. I don't know. Whatever the case, he's using infatuation. He said, my relationship will keep me from coming to the party of salvation. However, I never realized this. After a sober and sombering time reflecting upon this, this man had some justification for his excuse. Now you think about it. I've married a wife. I can't come. Did not the law in the Old Testament make provision for newlyweds? Did it not? It said in Deuteronomy, when a man hath taken a wife, he shall not go out to war, neither shall he be charged with any business, but he shall be free at home 1 year, and shall cheer up his wife, which he hath taken. Seemingly, Brother Ken, this fellow was within his rights to refuse. But you know what? I've never met a bride yet that wouldn't, a newlywed, that wouldn't jump at the chance to get dressed up and to go out to a fancy dinner. Because she ain't got to cook. And may I tell you, though he says I've married a wife and cannot come, though he had to stay at home, can I tell you, only Jewish men were predominantly invited to feast. Having a new wife would have kept him from the battlefield, but it wouldn't have kept him from the banquet. However, I do not know too many ladies who would not go out to eat. He said, I've married a wife. I cannot go. The truth is, can I tell you, the truth in all three of these excuses was they had no desire to do it. Church, let me tell you, If there's a will, there's a way. During the process of churches closing, I had a will to get the gospel out. So we had to find a way. Because men did not stop dying during this time. Men were dying. Some churches didn't preach. Some churches closed their doors. What are you going to do about the people that are dying and going to hell? Where there's a will, there's a way. You see, one man had a land that had to be procured. One man said, my labor has to be proved. My oxen have to be proved. The other guy said, I've got a lady that had to be pleased. Let me ask you, do any of these excuses sound familiar? They should be, because I believe they're the top 3 excuses the devil uses. I got possessions, I can't do it. I got pursuits, I can't do it. And I got people. Can I tell you the truth of the matter is, an excuse is nothing more than an alibi. Has it ever occurred to you that we make excuses because we realize we're doing the wrong thing? In all my years of ministry, I've never heard the first person make an excuse for going to church. I never heard anybody offer an excuse for going to church. I've heard excuses why you can't go. Yet I've heard countless make an excuse for not going. Why? Because we do not make excuses for doing the right thing. Our excuses are always for doing the wrong thing. The truth of the matter is, the field will be better tilled, the oxen will be better driven, and the wife more wisely, tenderly, and sacredly loved if in your heart Jesus Christ is enthroned. So only our abusive excuses, our absorption with our duties and relationships, the same excuses people use today. Here it is. I've got someplace to go. I bought a house, bought a piece of property, got to go see it. Got someplace, got to go. Number 2, I got something else to do. I got to go check my garden. I've got to go. I've got something else that I have to do. Or I've got someone else to please. How many understand this morning that each one of these excuses were silly? They were stupid. None of them had a good reason as to why they could not take up the salvation. None of them had a good reason as to why they could not serve God. I've heard it a dozen times. Preacher, I know I need to get saved, but... Preacher, I know I need to be there Sunday and Sunday night and Wednesday night, but... Excuses. Excuses. We hear them every day. The Lord shows us how stupid they are. I heard one time, and I've used this story, about 4 college freshmen hung out together. And they were all intent on having more fun than study. I'm not saying you're doing that, but that's what they did. These guys were always late to a certain class because they had a professor who was a pushover. They had a multitude of excuses why their assignments were not finished on time, or why they did not show up for class time and time again. When it came time for the final exam, they were late once again. About the time everyone else was finishing, they showed up giggling and told the professor they had a flat tire and wanted to take the makeup test later. The professor said, "No problem. Have a seat in the 4 corners of the classroom. I prepared a special final exam for you guys, and I'll make it easy, and it only has one question. Since you guys haven't turned in all your assignments, I'll give you another chance, and if all 4 of you answer the question correctly, you'll get an A, but if any of you miss it, you all fail." It took a moment to write the question in 4 exam books. 4 guys were grinning. Man, they got this. He handed them their books. Their smiles disappeared. when they read the question. One question. Here's what it said. Which tire was flat? As the professor stood before them, each one of the four boys realized they were in trouble. They got up. Each one of them tossed their exam in the trash can, and they walked out. Their excuses had caught up with them. You can make excuses galore. But one day, all your excuses for not coming to God and getting saved and serving Him will be seen for exactly what they are. Eventually, your excuses will be proven lies. I'm reminded of a couple, Gene and Carolyn, who one time were entertaining for the first time since the birth of their baby. Everything ran smoothly until one of Gene's buddies arrived with his new girlfriend, a woman who Carolyn did not care anything for or about. She beckoned to her husband. I need to see you. She told him we need to go, and when she beckoned for him, she said, we need to go check on the baby. So they went into the privacy of the nursery. She spoke freely her hatred and disdain for this girl. When they went downstairs to rejoin the party, they were greeted, Brother Sam, with an awkward silence by everybody in the room, except for the occasional murmuring of a sleepy baby that came from the infant monitor sitting on the table. One day, all your excuses will be seen for exactly what they are. Excuses. Preacher, I can't serve God. I bought a piece of land. I got to go see it. Daddy bought it, could have stayed there until the next day. I can't serve God. I've got 5 yoke of oxen, and I got to go see if they'll work. Well, you can do that in the daytime, but the banquet's at night. An excuse. I want you to come to the banquet of salvation. I'm married a wife. I cannot come. All 3 of them. Excuses. All 3 of them. Skin of reason. Stuffed with a lie. I want you to think of it. You only make excuses for something you do not want to do. If it's something that ought to be done, you do it. If it's something you don't want to do, you will offer an excuse. Where there's a will, there's a way. If you want to be saved, all that's standing between you and salvation is your will. If you want to serve God, all that's standing between you and serving God is your will. Excuses. 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 I asked you this morning, what excuse are you using? What excuse are you using for not getting saved? What excuse are you using for not serving God? Oh, I can't come to church on Sunday, but isn't it amazing? People can't come to church on Sunday, but they can go to work on Monday. That headache that's killing them on Sunday, they are able to go to work with it on Monday. Excuses. 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 And I tell you, there's going to come a time, either at the great white throne, where every lost person will stand before God. God, you will see. God will show you the fallacy and the lie of every excuse. Whether it be at the judgment seat of Christ for the same as to why we can't serve God. God will show us the fallacy of every one of our excuses. 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 hear them every day. Church, let's quit living on excuses. Lost person, quit trying to put off salvation by offering excuses. Because one day this life's going to be over. There won't be a time to give any more excuses. Keep your head bowed. Every eye closed. The quietness of the hour, I'd ask you this. You say, preacher, I'm guilty. That's it. Just I'm guilty. I'm not talking about salvation or service. But I'm guilty. Any like that? I see it. Any like that? I see it. You know, we have excuses why we can't do certain things. I've watched. How many of those people go into Home Depot, and go into Lowe's, go into Walmart, went there and had no excuse, but when they came to church, they had an excuse. I don't think there's as many people in Walmart as there is in most churches. Excuses. 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 Maybe you're here and you're not saved. You said, preacher, I don't know the Lord's my personal Savior. Pray for me. That's it. That's all I'm going to do is pray for me. I'm not sure that I'm saved. Pray for me. Anybody like that? Just slip your hand in. Just slip it in. See it? See it? See it? I'm going to pray for you before we're dismissed. But don't listen to the devil. He'll give you the excuse as to why you can't get saved today. I can tell you one of the prime reasons. Well, if you go forward and talk to the preacher, you may get this COVID-19. You know why he tell you that? Because he wants you to go straight to hell. I can tell you how to get saved 6 foot apart. So it's all up to you. Some people, the devil will give you an excuse why you can't come tonight. And you'll listen. It's just like these. It's ridiculous. He'll give some of you an excuse why you can't come on Wednesday night. And you'll listen. Can I tell you? Excuses are the nails that build a house of failure. Excuses are the nails that build a house of failure. As we stand to our feet, it is still bowed and eyes still closed. You say, preacher, I'm not saved.